Hello everyone, I am the Medic Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Warhammer 40,000 Commander Precons, Magus Lucea Kane. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Lucea is a 1/1 human Tyranid wizard for 1 generic, 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red. She has a triggered ability that puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature at the beginning of your combat step. If nothing else, this is good to put that counter on Lucea herself since she's just a 1/1, making her very easy to kill. However, the main reason for running her in the command zone is her mana ability. She taps for 2 colorless mana that, when used to cast a spell or activate an ability with X in its casting cost, you copy that spell or ability. While this grants her the potential for being the best commander for Hydra, Tribal, and similar strategies, I decided not to limit her solely to that. That being said, I do try to make the most of her abilities by including as many spells and effects with X in their casting costs as possible. It's just not tied to any further theme beyond that. Since Lucea's ability is a copy effect, let's first go over the handful of cards in the deck that capitalize on the copy aspect before seeing what it is that we'll be copying, which is a ton of stuff. Twinning Staff and Errant Street Artist are auto-includes in decks like this that seek to copy spells. While Twinning Staff will copy the copied spell for free, Errant requires paying 2 and tapping. At least she only costs 1 blue to cast, plus it has Flash and Haste, so we could be sneaky with further copying spells, especially if we're casting those X spells at instant speed at the beginning of the end step before our turn. In any case, she's amazing regardless of how and when we choose to get her in play. Unbound Flourishing is another way to copy spells, but it's only limited to instants and sorceries and only if they have an X in their casting cost. That being said, the deck has plenty of those. Plus, it also helps out permanents with X in its casting cost by doubling the value of X after casting them. This is especially overwhelming for opponents when we're casting the deck's beaters. Lastly, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, Sakashima the Imposter, and Spark Double help with Lucea's copying effect by copying her all together. We do have to tap them for mana and use it to pay for the same spell and effect, but you get the point. More copies of Lucea equals more copies of X spells and effects. As for those X spells and effects that we want to be copying, let's start with the deck's beaters. Out of all the X creatures legal in Commander, I ended up with Altered Ego, Hydroid Krasis, Lifeblood Hydra, Ochre Jelly, Primordial Hydra, Shivan Devastator, and Neverwinter Hydra. Of course, you can run whichever ones you prefer, but these are the ones I liked best when testing. Altered Ego is especially busted as it's essentially a clone in Hydra form. With Lucea, we can get 2 copies of it on the stack, meaning that we can choose to copy 2 different creatures if we wanted to. That variability alone is worth its inclusion, but it also enters with X +1/+1 counters. Hydroid Krasis and Lifeblood Hydra both gain us life and draws us cards. The only difference is that the Krasis does it when entering the battlefield, and the Hydra does it when dying. Speaking of value when dying, Ochre Jelly can be quite annoying due to its splitting when dying. Its counters are halved each time but rounded down, so try and put an amount of counters on it equal to a multiple of 2 if you're all about that min-max life. Speaking of multiples of 2, Primordial Hydra doubles its +1/+1 counters at the beginning of our upkeep. If not dealt with very quickly enough, it can very easily one-shot someone out of the game. Shivan Devastator is essentially a fireball the time you cast it since it costs the same and has haste. That being said, it becomes even more devastating when copied with the deck's copy abilities. Lastly, Neverwinter Hydra has the potential of coming in massively huge. It does have double X in its casting cost, but the expected value of a 6-sided die is 3.5. So on average, you should be getting about 3 +1/+1 counters for each 2 mana invested in it. It also has Ward 4, making it quite annoying to get rid of as well. Similarly, you should be able to run Hydra Doodle, which is basically the same card except that this one has Reach, whereas the other one has Ward 4. Unfortunately, you can't run it because it's not legal in Commander due solely to the color of its border, but I digress. The best thing about these creatures is their mana value. Thanks to that, a card like Citadel Flute does a ton of work in this deck. If we use Lucea to pay for X, then we can tutor for 2 creatures with mana value X or less. And these previously mentioned creatures aren't the only X creature spells in the deck, so you can very easily use these to get those creatures with built-in interaction, but we'll see those later on. And even if we're not tutoring for Hydra type creatures, we can still get any 2 creatures we want if we pay what's needed. Going back to beats, Fractal Harness, Colonian Hydra, and Karn's Bastion help us with those +1/+1 counters. While the best of these is obviously Colonian Hydra, since it doubles the +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures, the Harness is still good because it gets copied with Lucea. This means that the copy resolves, entering the battlefield and creating a fractal that it then gets attached to, and then the original does the same. So we're still getting 2 beaters for the price of 1, and when we can, we then move the equipment somewhere else if we wanted to. Karn's Bastion doesn't even take up a slot on the deck, so it's naturally included here. Keswick Wolfrun and Exponential Growth are some more things to copy with Lucea. The land obviously doesn't take up a slot on the deck, and it has the added bonus of giving trample too, so pumping up 2 creatures for the price of 1 can potentially end the game. Speaking of game ending, Exponential Growth is just disgusting. Y'all know I love my maths, and this is no exception. While it does have a double X casting cost, that doesn't matter because you're still getting your mana's worth by doubling it. Being able to exponentially increase a creature's power is no joke. One with the Kami, Turvagon, and Scepter of Celebration take further advantage of our creature's size. One with the Kami is absolutely busted because it can help us not only recover from a board wipe, but be the only one with a massive army after one. Granted, we'd only have 1/1 spirits, but that's better than nothing. Imagine flashing this in response to a board wipe when we have over 30 +1/+1 counters distributed amongst our creatures. Turvagon itself is a creature that can be copied with Lucea, and since it has Ravenous, it has the potential of drawing us a card too. Then when it connects, we create X/1/1 creature tokens, helping us go wide as well as tall, or serving as chump blockers for when we need to send our fatties into the red zone. The Scepter does the same thing when equipped to a beefy creature. It also gives +2/+0 and trample as a bonus, which is nothing to scoff at. Lastly, the Reaver Cleaver does something similar, but in creating a ton of treasure tokens instead of 1/1 creature tokens. To say that this will accelerate our game to obnoxious levels is quite the understatement. If that weren't enough, it also gives a slight power boost along with trample to really ensure we get that mana acceleration. Now that I mentioned mana acceleration, Lucea can't be the only way to get us ahead. Fortunately, the deck has multiple epic ways to accelerate our mana generation thanks to our commander's ability. Animist's Awakening is simply busted here. Since it costs X and a green to cast, it might seem like it's a matter of needing mana to make mana, but we don't have to sink that much mana into it if we're copying it with Lucea. If she's already out, then we already had 4 mana. Thus, with 6 mana, we're able to look at the top 10 cards of our library and put any lands, not just basics, but any land, revealed right onto the battlefield. And then if we have Spell Mastery, they enter untapped. Magus of the Candelabra is another busted way to accelerate our mana generation. Unfortunately, mana abilities can't be copied, so we can't equip things like Illusionist Bracers and Battle Mage's Bracers to Lucea. However, the Magus' ability is not a mana generating ability, meaning that if we use Lucea to pay for it, we can copy its effect. That way we're untapping way more lands than we really have, since we can respond to the effects on the stack by tapping lands for mana. You could also run Candelabra of Tawnos if you have the lettuce for it, but it's around $1,300 as of the recording of this video, so unless you already have it or are fine with proxying it, you don't really need it, as good as it is here. The Magus is good enough. Mana Reflection, Nyxbloom Ancient, and Nexus also help but aren't just limited to lands, well the first 2 at least. Since the deck has so many X effects, if we want them to be as epic as possible, we should be making the most of our mana generation. Multiplicative effects obviously go a long way, and while neither of these 2 creatures are technically mana dorks, they do function better than mana dorks. Speaking of, the only mana dork in the deck is Bloom Tender. It's the best one to run here given that it can tap for one of each of the deck's 3 colors, while only casting 2 to cast. So having a single mana dork is fine. Same with the rocks. The deck's only running Elementalist Palette and Soul Ring. While Soul Ring is pretty ubiquitous by now, the palette is amazing here because of how much mana it can potentially generate. 31% of the deck will trigger it, and Karn's Bastion can proliferate its counters anyways. Even then, we can only use that obscene amount of colorless mana on X cost, but 35% of the deck can benefit from it. In any case, nothing beats Farseek, Nature's Lure, 3 Visits, and Into the North in terms of mana acceleration. In that sense, green will always have the advantage due to so many 2-costed land-based ramp spells. Thanks to the 6 snow-covered basics and 3 snow duels in the deck, Into the North is now a nice companion to my favorite ramp trifecta. Besides mana acceleration, we can also use the deck's perks with interaction too. Aberrant, Exocrine, Moloch, and Zoanthrope are some more of those low CMC X creatures the deck loves having. Not only do these Tyrannid all have Ravenous, drawing us a card, but they all have removal stapled onto them. Aberrant is the only one that doesn't have it on an enter the battlefield trigger, but at least it triggers on combat damage, making it reusable. Flame Blast Dragon and Steelbane Hydra also have built-in removal but require mana to activate. Unfortunately, the dragon's ability is not an activated ability, so it cannot be copied with Lucea. However, any effects that care about paying X costs will still work. So you can use the mana from Elementalist Palette, the mana from basic lands if you have Nexus in play, etc. Steelbane Hydra getting copied by Lucea is a nice bonus since you don't need to tap it or anything to naturalize. You just pay 3 and remove a +1/+1 counter from it. But more copies means more artifacts and enchantments to destroy. Curse of the Swine and Blasphemous Act provide some more interaction in the form of creature removal. Granted, only Curse of the Swine can be copied with Lucea's ability, but we still need non-synergistic interaction in the deck as well, so Blasphemous Act is a good solution in case of emergencies. Same with Chaos Warp, Beast Within, and Cyclonic Rift that are obviously included in the deck. The first two are amazing catch-alls and the last one needs no explanation. Going back to synergistic interaction, we have Jaya's Immolating Inferno, Shatterskull Smashing, and Electro Dominance. The first one has the potential to end the game since its 3 targets can just be each opponent. Sinking a ton of mana into this and then copy it with Lucea is no joke, especially if copied multiple times. Imagine doing so with Lucea, 3 copies of Lucea, Twinning Staff, and Errant. Magical Christmas land for sure. Scatterskull Smashing isn't the best removal spell since it can only hit up to 2 creatures and their planeswalkers, but thanks to Lucea, you can essentially bump that number up to 4. Best of all, since its backside is a land with the potential of entering the battlefield untapped, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Electro Dominance is an absolute house here. Not only is it a great old school instant speed Burn type spell, but when it resolves, you can then free cast any spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to X. So if you copied this with Lucea, you get to free cast 2 spells from your hand. So good. Tyrant Guard, Kubris, Harvest Celebrant, and March of the Swirling Mist are more on the protective side of the interaction spectrum. Tyrant Guard requires being sacrificed in order to give hexproof and indestructible to creatures with control with a +1/+1 counter on them, which are hopefully all of them. Since it has Ravenous, casting it with Lucea will at least give us 2 copies of it, which is amazing. Kerbis isn't as extreme since we just have to remove a +1/+1 counter from it to prevent all damage that a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it would receive. Great for combat and for surviving mass burn effects like Blasphemous Act. March of the Swirling Mist is amazing because it phases out the creatures. Thanks to being phased out, they get to keep all of the counters on them, auras and equipment attached to them, etc., since they're phased out together. Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, Negate, Counterspell, Mana Drain, and Heroic Intervention are the non-synergistic protective effects in the deck. These form a decent enough counter magic suite to protect our things or prevent the combo player from winning, with Heroic Intervention coming in clutch against those board wipe effects you can't counter. Lastly, Mystic Sanctuary and Reap the Past provide some recovery effects with the Sanctuary not taking up a slot in the deck. Best of all, it can be fetched for at instant speed with a fetch land for having the island subtype. Reap the Past is amazing here since it can be copied with Lucea. You should be able to recover a bunch of cards with it even though it gets exiled upon resolving. The final cards to make the most of Lucea's ability are the Draw X cards instants. Being able to copy either Diviner's Portent, Even the Score, Blue Sun Zenith, Commander's Insight, Drown in Dreams, Stroke of Genius, and Expansion Explosion is no joke. You didn't think the deck was drawing cards just off of Ravenous, did you? With the split spell, I've only ever cast the Explosion half and it's insane. Not only are you drawing X cards at instant speed, but you're also dealing X damage to any target. These draws into so many cards that Thought Vessel, Decanter of Endless Water, and Reliquary Tower are included for good measure. That way we can draw as much as we want without worrying about discarding down to maximum hand size. Alchemist's Refuge is included to help give us options of what to do with all of our mana. That way we can keep our mana up for interaction, but if we didn't need to, we could then sink it all into those X draw spells. But we can also activate this land to play our spells, thus making sure we're always able to play at any time whenever needed. The final card I want to discuss is Insight. I absolutely love this card. If you use Lucea to pay for it, then you get to copy it. With all of the mana acceleration in the deck and copy effects, you could very easily empty out your contraption deck onto the battlefield with just one casting. Even if you had all 45 contraptions in it, since Lucea has green in her color identity, so you can run Sap Sucker in it. But you can only still run the best 15 contraptions if you wanted to be efficient about it. Unfortunately, even though 22 attractions are Eternal Legal and most of the cards that open attractions are Eternal Legal, Insight is not legal in Commander solely because of the color of its border. All it does is assemble X contraptions. If all it did was open X attractions, then it would be legal, but I digress. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 9 fetch lands, all 3 shock lands, all 3 snow duels, all 3 slow duels, Ketria Triome, Reflecting Pool, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each snow-covered basic land due to the previously mentioned Into the North. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Magus Lucea Kane. Hopefully you've seen enough of my content to know I love copy effects and Lucea is no different. I love the spin the deck has that you're also able to copy activated abilities and not just X spells. This opens up the door for a ton of possibilities. It's a shame that Higher Duel and Insight aren't Commander legal, but hopefully we'll get an Unset Masters where they're printed in black bordered and you can thus play with them in Commander. But that's a topic for another video. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Medic Kirby, and happy brewing.